Hello, YouTube. My name is Alan, and it's that time once again. Let's talk metal. For this video, we're going to be doing a deep dive, although these are more like shallow dives for some bands that, didn't have a very long catalog. You can't discuss them for hours on end because they don't have multiple albums and all that. But they did get out, a handful of items, and I think it's interesting to give them a chance to shine, let people find out a little bit more about them. The band that we're going to be talking about tonight is a new wave of British heavy metal band called Trespass. Fairly well known in new wave of British heavy metal circles. Again, they had kind of a small body of work, but very high quality. And they also stuck around a little bit longer than most people realized and are actually still active. So we'll take a look at what they did, focusing, primarily on the early stuff, but I'll mention a little bit of what they're up to these days as well. So first off, Trespass, cool name for a heavy metal band. I first encountered them because they were featured on the new wave of British heavy metal 79 Revisited compilation that was put out. The song included is called One of These Days. It's one of the standouts on an outstanding compilation, and it was one of the very first things I went to track down once I started collecting vinyl for New Wave of British Heavy Metal. The band kind of has always revolved around the Sutcliffe brothers, Mark and Paul, and Trespass is a great name to begin with, but it doesn't have the most, metal of origins. It kind of sounds like a good metal band name, like, don't trespass, don't tread on me, stay out, all this stuff. But in one interview with the band, they kind of intimated that it actually came from a little bit less of a, metal or heavyish source. Seems like the band name most likely, quote unquote, uh, came from the second Genesis album, Trespass, or the first Genesis album, if you're one of those Genesis fans that pretends that from Genesis to Revelation just never ever happened. Whichever way you want it, that's a discussion for another video. So, yeah, you can thank Genesis for the name of this cool new wave of British heavy metal band. So anyway, they kind of, got themselves up and running in the late 70s, and in 1979, they went into a local studio and recorded what would become their first single. It's this one, titled One of These Days, and the flip side of it is called Bloody Moon. And this is where we'll start off with our first song clip of the night. As usual, I'll jump a little bit ahead in some of these clips, especially if there's like a longer intro section, because I want to give you a decent idea of what the song actually sounds like. So here is Trespass with their debut single. We'll do the A side, One of These Days. All right, so yeah, I think it's a good idea of what the band's sound is. A bit rooted in 70s hard rock, but a little more bite to it, little heavier handed. Comparisons have been made to some of Thin Lizzy's work. I think there's a definite dose of UFO included in there as well. And yeah, it's a very good song, recognized by a lot of folks as, kind of one of the classics of the genre, especially from the early days of the genre. The single was recorded in October 79. Now, whether it got released at the tail end of 1979 or at the very beginning of 1980, seems to be a little bit of debate about. If you poke around in different references and different online sources, you'll see both 1979 and 1980 given as a release date for the single. All I can say for sure is that the recording session happened in October of '79. So maybe it squeaked out there at the very tail end of the year. Maybe it was technically, right after New Year's before the single came out. Regardless, it's a good single. It features Mark on vocals, and the band would pretty quickly move from strength to strength. They got some airplay with the single, even though this was kind of, a small, private affair. At the time, there was a groundswell of interest happening in that stuff in the UK. And so they could get played on programs, even on, BBC with DJs like Tommy Vance. They got some play from Neil Kay at, sort of the infamous, heavy metal Soundhouse bandwagon shows and all that good stuff. Couple of things about the single before we move on to what happened to them next. One thing is that I used to hear back in the 90s that there were multiple pressings of the single that were somehow slightly different, but I've never seen any follow-up on that. Supposedly, if memory serves me right, there was supposed to be something slightly different about the labels, whether there was, copyright date change because it was a second pressing or something. I'm not exactly sure. It's been about 30 years since this was brought up to me. And again, I never really got any hard, definitive details about it. Second thing is that I've seen a couple of people asking online for ways to try to verify that a picture sleeve is original. That some people apparently are worried that there have been batches of color photocopies of this sleeve done. Uh, in that case, you just got to look for the normal things. Check the quality of the print, make sure nothing looks particularly blurry, make sure nothing looks particularly dark. I've had some photocopied New Wave of British heavy metal sleeves. They almost will always turn out a bit darker. You'll see, especially on any dark areas, like the print here would probably show up as slightly darker. Uh, Other than that, there's not necessarily like a hard and fast way. It's not like they're going to be, printed with something down here that says, "Oh yeah, this is a color sleeve that was made in 1985 or something." Uh, I guess it's possible that some folks have made colored copy sleeves. Would be a little bit strange simply because this single has always been pretty readily available. It is not a high dollar item and never has been. A couple of sources have cited that there were probably a couple of thousand copies pressed, and it's always been an easy one to track down. I probably paid 20 bucks or so for it in the earlier mid 90s. You can get copies on Discogs right now for about the same price. I'd be surprised if you had to pay much over 20, maybe 25 bucks at most to get a copy of it. So I don't know why people would need to go to the trouble of manufacturing lots of fake sleeves for an item that's such a easy to get and low budget item in the first place. It'd kind of be like, going to all the trouble of counterfeiting $1 bills or something. Regardless, it's a cool single. I like the very simple picture sleeve design where, they're talking about one of these days and on the calendar they've got number 32 circled. Just kind of a neat way to get the point across that, yeah, one of these days, and we all know how that goes. One of these days never comes, just like 32 never comes on the calendar. So they're getting attention, they're getting some airplay, they're getting some exposure. They also got some feedback. The story is that Neil Kay did not like Mark's vocals and told the band they should try to get a different vocalist. And being a bunch of, impressionable 19-year-olds, they did as they were told by this guy who's a big name in the, metal circuit that they're part of now. And so they brought in a new vocalist named Steve Mills. They also changed their bass player around this time, so there were other lineup shifts happening, which would become a bit of a running theme with Trespass. But anyway, they got Steve Mills in on vocals in time to go in and record a couple of songs to appear on a compilation album. The band was already getting the attention of EMI, and they were given a chance to add not just one, but two tracks to the second installment of the Metal for Mothers compilation. Volume 1 famously included Iron Maiden. Trespass seemed to be one of the bands that EMI had their eye on for Volume 2, as they got the lead track, which is a re-recorded version of One of These Days with Steve on vocals, And also they got the closing track, Storm Child. There's some really good stuff on the compilation in between as well. Not to get too sidelined here, but you have the amazing Lady of Mars by Dark Star, another classic of the genre. There's a song on here by The Raid, also known as Jameson Raid. A lot of people like that band. Chevy is featured. I always kind of liked their style. White Spirit is on here. So yeah, not a bad compilation whatsoever. Let's check out a clip of this re-recorded one of these days. You can tell right away it's slightly different. It's played at a little bit of a faster tempo. Sound quality is a bit better. This is the version that appeared on the 79 Revisited compilation. It's always been my favorite version of the track. Part of that is probably just that it's the first version I heard, but I do think musically it's a little better than the version that appeared on the single. So yeah, you've heard the original a couple of minutes ago. Now let's check out the second version from Metal from Others Volume 2. Here's One of These Days with the revamped lineup. Yeah, so there's the revamped version again. In my opinion, I just like it a little bit better. That little bit of extra upbeat tempo to it. Like Mill's vocal performance, just a little bit better. I didn't mind Mark's vocal performance the way some people apparently did, but yeah, I think it sounds really good. Let's also check out a clip of the Stormchild track that ended the compilation. So here's a little bit of Stormchild. Oh, there's a bit of Stormchild, another very good song. So yeah, again, the band's kind of putting out some very solid stuff here. They would get a chance to appear on another compilation by the end of the year via the route of the Friday Rock Show sessions. They were invited to do one of these. If you're unfamiliar with these, it was a chance given to bands, kind of up and coming new bands, to go into BBC studios, record some songs live, and get them played on the radio within a month or two. Trespass were invited in for a chance to do a session. They recorded 4 songs, which pretty much everybody did. One of them was selected for inclusion on a compilation that the BBC put out at the end of 1980 called Metal Explosion. This was one of the first heavy metal, or sorry, one of the first new wave of British heavy metal compilations I got after the 79 Revisited thing came out. And one of the main reasons I wanted it was that, yep, sure enough, right there we have a track from Trespass. This one's called Visionary, and we'll check out a sample of this one. Visionary is kind of a longer, more epic track, so I may play one snippet and then kind of skip towards the middle of the song so you can hear a little bit of that part as well. But here is Visionary from Trespass.
One familiar theme
All right, so yeah, there's a bit of the epic song Visionary by Trespass. Really nicely done song, very moody, atmospheric. It builds very nicely towards that middle. Then it kind of bursts out for a while, much more sort of up-tempo for a bit. Really, really well performed song. And yeah, this also is a pretty good compilation. Again, just a kind of quick sidebar here. You get tracks from Samson and Praying Mantis. Both of those bands are okay, and these songs are okay. The Trespass song is one of the two real standouts for me, though. There's a really good song on here by a band called Taurus that I'm not sure they really recorded anything else. The song's called Paper Chaser. It's kind of a fun, much more upbeat kind of number. The flip side, you have songs from More and Money, and also Ian Gillan, which feels like a very dated thing, but Gillan was experiencing a bit of a resurgence around this time. The real winner, though, and the reason most people want this compilation is the unreleased Angel Witch track, Extermination Day, which is by far the heaviest thing on this compilation. That can be said of pretty much any compilation that featured Angel Witch back in the day. So yeah, bottom line is that by the end of 1980, things are definitely rolling along nicely for the band. They had around late 80, 1981, they were getting interest from labels, but of course things never quite fell into place. As I mentioned before, EMI was showing a lot of interest with Metal for Mothers 2, but the story goes that around that time, EMI merged with another company. People were shuffled around in the offices, and basically all the folks that they had been dealing with at EMI were basically reassigned to other projects, and Trespass kind of ended up falling through the cracks of that transition. Right? Similarly, though, Chrysalis Records was showing interest in the band. The band wanted to kind of get back in the studio and record a follow-up single, since obviously they'd been doing quite well and they wanted to capitalize on that momentum. Chrysalis kind of convinced them maybe to postpone that because Chrysalis wanted to get the band signed and then release the record. But when Chrysalis came to check, there was another issue here. Chrysalis also wanted them to switch vocalists again. So this was becoming a bit of a thing. Mills was out. Fellow named Eventually they ended up with a fellow named Rob Eklund. Now I think in between there for a bit, Mark was back on vocals. So you can see one of the problems this band was having was no continuity behind the mic. Mills had done a good job, but the label didn't seem to like him for some reason, and so they had to shuffle things up again. Chrysalis came to check the band out live, and it was one of those kind of classic horror stories where just everything went wrong for the band that night, from the vocalist having a hideous cold where it was just all clogged up with snot to equipment not working, and they feel like it pretty much cost them any shot at a contract from Chrysalis. So they did go ahead and make the second single, released it themselves, and it's this one, Jealousy on one side and Live It Up on the other. This one came out around, double checking, because this one also, is cited in 1980. Every now and then I've seen 81 cited for it, but I think this comes out in very late 1980 after they've been going through having everything go right for the year. By the end of the year, yeah, they were running into some issues. But we'll check out a clip from Live It Up. I was never nuts about this picture sleeve. The brown tone, sepia kind of look. It does, I would almost rather have been just, another black and white kind of monochrome sleeve. And yeah, I guess, the idea is that here's evidence that they've been living it up, but with the brown scale and the weird, porthole, manhole cover, a storm drain, whatever's going on here, I don't know. It doesn't look like much of a party to me. But anyway, let's check out a sample of Live It Up and see how the band sounds on their second 7-inch. All right, so there's a bit of Live It Up. Band's still operating in the same style. That song's, maybe a little more upbeat than some that they have done in the past, but overall it still very much sounds like Trespass. Not a bad single. I don't think it's quite as good as the debut single, but it's still, very solid. Nothing wrong with it at all. Heading into 1981, the band's still kind of, trying to work things out. They end up releasing a 3-track 7-inch. So technically an EP, which is called Bright Lights. Also comes with a kind of relatively straightforward picture sleeve. I do not have a copy of Bright Lights anymore. For me, it's not their strongest material, although it doesn't deviate a whole lot from their traditional sound. It's technically a little bit rarer than either of the singles. People have suggested it was probably printed in a slightly smaller run, so you don't see it as often. But again, it's not a super rarity. It's not a high dollar record whatsoever. And we will go ahead and play a clip from it. This is one of the songs which is called The Duel. So there's a bit of the Duel. They have a decent little kind of Iron Maiden-like gallop going on there. The sound overall, is a little bit brighter, maybe slightly poppier than what they've done. It sounds like a little bit closer to Live It Up than anything they had done before that. The Bright Lights EP really wouldn't add that much to the band's resume, though. And, while they would keep the project going for a little bit longer, it eventually all sort of fell apart. More or less. There is a lot more to the Trespass story. Mark and Paul sort of reinvented themselves in a project a couple years later called Blue Blood, with it spelled uh, just BLUD. Classic 80s heavy metal misspelling. So they get a point for that. I've never heard the Blue Blood material. The brothers have described it in interviews as their attempt to out Bon Jovi Bon Jovi. So, if you want to go check that out, proceed with caution. It's probably going to be a little bit more on the sort of, glam and hairspray side of 80s rock music than the metal side. But, hey, they'd done the metal thing, didn't work out. A lot of those bands tried shifting direction to something with more commercial appeal. Usually didn't work out, and it didn't work out for Blue Blood either. But they would also kind of get back together as Trespass later on, after they saw that there was some interest in the new wave of British heavy metal in the early 90s. Yeah, the band reformed. They released an album in 1993 that's simply entitled Head. If ever there was a more 90s metal album title than Head, I can't think of it. It kind of perfectly encapsulates the whole one word with kind of an obvious double entendre, bland, generic album title than Head. 90s were a weird time for heavy metal. I've never heard the Head material either, but I've heard it described in multiple places as actually the band kind of trying to overcorrect for their Blue Blood phase and going very aggressive. Different reviewers have compared it to things like Metallica and Pantera that apparently they tried to go full on thrash mode. So if you go check that one out, again, you're probably going to be in for something quite different than what I've played here tonight or the Blue Blood material. There's been, after that, different compilation albums were put together for a while. The one that I've shown a couple of times on screen is this one called One of These Days. It's a very nice 2 CD set that has all the different recording sessions, and everything's nicely labeled so that you know which versions made it, like onto the first single from this session, which versions from this later session were included on each compilation and stuff like that. And as you can see from the track list, there's a lot of extra songs here that they did record demos of that never made it onto a vinyl item during their original heyday. So, it's a nice compilation. And again, there are others also. There's a 2-part one that's called The Works. It's just a single CD, but later there was another volume put out called The Works 2. So yeah, you can definitely, find all the Trespass material collected in some places like this. But you can also find some new Trespass material as well. The band has been active as recent as 2023. They put out an album called Wolf at the Door. This is one that probably would have, flown right under my radar, but it was pointed out to me by Craig Zoller. Craig has joined Marty and I for the Heavy Metallurgy stream many times. It's always a fantastic guest. And Craig knows I like new wave of British heavy metal, and Trespass is apparently one of his kind of pet bands that he's always kind of been into. So he checked out the album and was very enthusiastic about it. So he recommended it to me. I've checked it out, and it's decent. I'm not as head over heels about it as Craig is, but it's certainly a fine enough album. It's not an embarrassing failed attempt to get the band back together or anything. And as such, I don't have a copy of it, but I've pulled up a sound clip here. So we'll check out a little bit of the second track from Trespass's 2023 album. This is a song called Daggers Drawn, and I'll give you a chance to kind of hear what the band is up to currently. So here we go.
Press the button and we
So yeah, that gives you a idea. You can still very much hear in that, clip and in some of the other songs on the album. It still sounds like Trespass. Obviously, some time has gone by. The recording quality is going to be a bit different than it was 40 some years ago and such. But there's still something that is quintessentially Trespass in that music and in that sound. So, not a bad album whatsoever. Hope it's doing well for the band, and maybe they've got another one in them in another year or so. We'll have to wait and see. But anyway, that is Trespass. Time to wrap this video up. So now let's talk metal in the comments down below. What do you think of the Trespass material? This is one of those new wave of British heavy metal bands that's probably not going to be heavy enough to satiate some fans, but might appeal to others, especially those who like, the 70s hard rock, and 80s metal sounds pre-thrash metal from like, the 80 to 83 window. Any other information about the band is always appreciated. Again, I've tried to put together information from different sources. I've read things published like Malcolm Macmillan's New Wave of British Heavy Metal Encyclopedia, interviews and liner notes that have been written by John Tucker about the band. But sometimes, pieces fall through the cracks. Sometimes I get names or dates flipped in my head and, they're not accurate. So any other information, corrections, or additions, certainly welcome. Please add them to the comments so that other people can read them and learn more about what was one of the really cool bands from the new wave of British heavy metal. All right, that is going to do it. So, as always, please take care. And until next time, keep banging your head.